Welcome back to the Tech Talks Daily Podcast, a place where we demystify complex technologies every day and provide real-world examples of how technology is transforming businesses and reshaping entire industries. But we do all this in a language that everyone can understand. And today, I want to attempt to once again demystify the complex world of blockchain, crypto, and even sharding. And although many of you listening will know this space inside out, it is incredibly hard to put that complex knowledge in a language that everyone will understand. And that's what we need to do to attract those that might be intimidated by this space, watching on the sidelines. If we can get those people on board, we can increase adoption. But today's guest is incredibly patient, and he does a wonderful job of doing just that. His name is Adam Simmons, and he is the Chief Strategy Officer at the decentralized finance protocol, Radix, which is a public ledger entirely focused on bringing DeFi into the mainstream. So it's a perfect guest to talk about this. And we're also going to talk about what makes Radix a radically different DeFi, and how to scale blockchain. And does the future of DeFi still belong to Ethereum? I know many of you are shouting, Neil, gas fees, as I mention that word out loud. And we'll also dive into why Adam expects DeFi to have more liquidity than any other single exchange in the transitional market in the near future. It's a lot to talk about, so buckle up and hold on tight, because I'm going to beam your ears all the way to Lincoln here in the UK, where Adam's going to talk about all this and much more. So a massive warm welcome to the show. Can you tell the listeners a little about who you are and what you do?
I'd love to. So my name is Adam Simmons. I'm the Chief Strategy Officer at RDX Works, which is one of the development companies behind the Radix Public Network, which is a layer one platform that is designed to make the easiest way for builders, developers, entrepreneurs, and users to interact with Web3 and DeFi.
Can't wait to find out more information about everything at Radix in a moment and all the work you're doing. But a bit of a tradition on this podcast where I like to take the guests back in time and find out more about their backstory. And everybody's got one. So can you share your origin story, where your passion for tech came from, or just a moment that would put you on this path you're on right now?
If you want to go way back, I think the answer would be my dad.
Yeah.
One of his proudest achievements in raising me was the fact that he had me successfully doing a 4-piece puzzle program with a mouse at 18 months old. So I've been using computers for quite a while. I then very much got into, I've always been a massive geek. So heavily involved in the video game space. That's where I started my career. Had a couple of successful startup and scale up businesses through that before I got into crypto. Again, crypto was one of those things that I was always aware of. I didn't particularly aim to get involved in the space professionally. I was actually quite hesitant to for quite a while, because I'd been aware of it in a previous startup where our seed investor had a very large interest in crypto, and it constantly been pushing us like, this technology is great, you should really incorporate it, you should really be looking at how you guys could use crypto. And we're in a very fortunate position that we were in a highly successful scale-up business, and we're like, there might be some stuff there, but it's a big distraction. It's early. This was back in like 2014, 2015 time. And we got to 2017, and for various reasons, we took a serious look at it. And we're like, if we're going to jump in, we don't want to do something that's half-hearted or just slap a token on the side and say it's crypto. And so I co-founded a project, launched in 2018, which was one of the worst points to launch a crypto project, but raised 18 million. That project's still going successfully today. Exited that business and then came to my role here at RDX working on Radix just under 3 years ago now. Again, complete chance. I was looking haphazardly while doing consulting work and freelance work, and saw what the Radix project was about. They had a role that was vaguely in my realm of interest. Got hooked, decided to apply. My 30 minutes with our CEO peers turned into about a 2-hour phone call. And by the end of it, I was begging him to let me come and start working here.
Fantastic. What a great story. And that path would lead you to Radix. And I suspect there's a big story there as well. And we will have people outside of the Web3 space. And a lot of people are often intimidated. So I always try and demystify technology and make it more palatable to audiences belong that community, and hopefully increase adoption along the way. So can you tell me more about Radix, the problems it set out to solve with technology, and also what makes it radically different DeFi from others that we may be familiar with out there?
There's a couple of different questions there. So let me hit them kind of
Sure.
a couple at a time. So what is Radix? So the easiest way to describe the Radix public network is that it's a decentralized network for digital assets, ownerships, and identity. And why does it exist? Well, ultimately, we believe, and the people, everyone who works on the project, that Web3 and DeFi being decentralized finance, is going to be the future in some form. We can go into that later if you wish to, but it's ultimately how all of us, we believe, will end up controlling and interacting with everything of value. And so if that's the case, if this kind of global asset layer is the thing that is going to become as important in our lives as the internet, which is like a global data layer, then we need to really make sure that this is able to scale to meet the needs of everyone. It is able to bring builders a developer experience that allows them to create competitive marketplaces of dApp that provide great utility to people who want to come and use them. And most importantly, at the moment, especially in crypto, is actually create an experience for users that gives them the confidence to come and explore the full potential of what Web3 can be. And then your second point, if I'm not mistaken, is how did we come about, or why is Radix radically different? So the analogy which I always like to use is to compare to Tesla and the electric car. And so when Tesla started, not many people necessarily remember this, but electric cars have been around for quite a while. They were, for the Brits, you may remember many Top Gear episodes featuring the G-Wiz, a horrible boxy two-seater car that was never popular, never took. But there was lots of attempts like that of creating an electric vehicle because the innovators saw that there's an opportunity there and it's something we need to transition to. And they were just trying to cobble together different pieces of cars and strap an electric motor and some batteries on. Didn't work very well. Tesla actually started with the Tesla Roadster, which, if memory serves, was an adapted Lotus Elise. And again, they went with a very similar approach of being like, well, we'll take a pretty good car, Lotus Elise, we'll take the combustion engine out, stick in some batteries, stick in some electric motors, job's done. And again, had some major difficulties. And what they did after that was they really took a step back and said, we need to look at every component of this, not just the car, but also the infrastructure. Because taking that radically different approach is what helped them reshape the industry. Suddenly, when the supercharger network was part of their plans, their goal wasn't necessarily to have a car with the longest possible range. It was a car that could get between the different superchargers. And that allowed them to design the car in a very specific way, electric first. And so they were thinking about how all the different components work together. And what many people don't know is Tesla built a huge amount of their things in-house in components of the car, not out of the standard array of like manufacturing providers to big typical car manufacturers. Obviously, that gives some advantages and some disadvantages. But what it meant was shortly after the Model S and the supercharger network went live in the United States, for the first time, an electric car owner could drive coast to coast and recharge at each of those spots in an electric car. That was just implausible in previous eras. So that radical approach is very similar to the approach we took with the Radix public network, which started many, many moons ago. So the founder of Radix, Dan Hughes, he started work on this back in 2013. Got bit by the Bitcoin bug, had a successful exit from another tech company and was like, yeah, this Bitcoin thing seems really cool. I get the promise, like a global decentralized network for money. Started playing around with it as every good engineer would and was like, this can scale to like 6 transactions per second. You might want to serve the entire world, but you can't serve a busy village in the countryside, let alone the planet. So started tinkering around with like, how do you solve this scalability problem? Fast forward years, and Dan and the team had got to that point of being like, we now have a roadmap to what a truly unlimited scalable network that maintains something called atomic composability, which is the ability for any asset or application on the network to interact with any other asset or application on the network instantaneously. It's one of the superpowers of Web3. Unfortunately, many other things in the space that are trying to solve scaling at the moment actually break that. So then we're like, we've got this smart contract platform. Should it just be a generic smart contract platform? And this was around the kind of 2018, 2019 period when DeFi or decentralized finance started to become a term. And one of the big things that our CEO peers realized was running anything on a decentralized public network has a higher cost than on a centralized network or database. And so therefore, there's got to be an economic incentive for the benefits to justify that increased cost. And obviously financial services and financial networks have that. Having a trustless, permissionless system for financial transactions has a huge economic benefit. So paying that slightly increased cost is probably worth it. We also had, from the work that Dan and the team had done in the years previous, things that proof of concepts and ideas around what we later discovered was called a DeFi already coming through. Like, what would a decentralized exchange look like? What would a stable coin look like? How could that revolutionize these different systems? And so at that point, we took the strategic decision that Radix is going to really focus on DeFi. And for anyone who's in the crypto space listening, being like, what about play to earn gaming? What about identities and all these other things? It gets a bit abstract, but in our opinion, DeFi is pretty much every use case of crypto or DLT technology, fundamentally, because if you're transacting anything on these networks, it's got a value, be that an NFT, be that an item in a game or anything like that. That's still transacting something of value, which is, again, a financial transaction. Same with identities, a bit more abstract, but I would say an identity is an asset of an individual and something that we do and should have ownership over and control over how and when it is used. So all of that together basically led us to the solution of going, well, actually, it's not just solving scalability that's the problem. We need to look at every single layer of the stack. And so with scalability and the roadmap to this unlimited scalable consensus algorithm, we're like, cool, what's the next layer? We need an execution environment and a programming language that actually lets developers intuitively build powerful and secure applications. You've only got to look at crypto, even outside of centralized things, but decentralized networks losing billions in hacks and exploits over the last few years. That's just not okay. That's like moving to a neighborhood where your house gets robbed once a year. You wouldn't accept it. And it's not through bad developers, it's because they don't have the tools. And then when we solved that, and that's been how we've had great traction there, we then started looking, going, well, what's the next problem? And the next problem we really saw was actually the user interface is shockingly bad for the end user. Like, I might be comfortable going to use something like MetaMask and just clicking sign a transaction. And when I set up my account saying, hey, here's a seed phrase, I've got to cut it up into 3 different pieces, store it on like titanium. So if my house burns down, it doesn't melt in a safe somewhere. And if I lose that, I lose all my money. My mum, my grandparents, they're not going to be okay with that. They're not going to have that massive trade-off of convenience to get a slight benefit and control. And so what we announced at the start of December at our RadFi event was the Radix wallet, which again took that radically different approach to how can we make a user experience that we don't have to bend people's arms to use. It just makes sense. And the guiding principle there was like, it should be just as intuitive and comfortable and confident using it as the best Web 2 app, but with all the superpowers of Web 3 and not compromising on things like decentralization and self-custody of assets.
It's incredibly cool what you're doing here. And again, just for anybody that's new to this space, and so just to ensure that we don't lose anyone and further set the scene for our conversation today, can I just ask you that you just explain what sharding is and also how the Radix way of sharding is different from other solutions too?
I will give it a go, Neil.
It's a big one.
in the confines of not confusing anyone who's not familiar with in the space, to give an example of that is certainly a challenge. So sharding as a concept is essentially just parallelizing transactions. So say you can think of it quite simple, like a pipe running water. You can make a pipe a certain thickness, put a certain pressure, and a certain amount of water will come through, but you've got limitations on all of that. If you need to get more water going through the same place, put a second pipe next to it. 3rd pipe, 4th pipe, 5th pipe. It's a good way to have the streams of water all going in the same way. So sharding is essentially parallelizing that and putting those different pipes in. Now, the problem with sharding in every other solution, be that what Ethereum 2.0 is planning to do, people like Avalanche, etc., even layer 2 networks are a type of sharding. The problem you get is that one of the magical features of Web3 and DeFi and all of these things is that today on Ethereum, which isn't sharded, it's just a single chain, I can go and interact with any asset, any application instantaneously at the same time. Now, you might be thinking, why would you want to do that, Adam? That sounds crazy. So The example that makes sense to me is arbitrage between different exchanges. And so arbitrage, for those who don't know, is a monumentally important aspect of creating a fair and competitive market in financial services. Because if you've got 2 marketplaces offering, say, GBP to USD, and their prices are different, someone will realize, oh, I can go and buy off one and sell on the other and make a little bit of profit. And then those 2 marketplaces will end up having a a much closer to parity of the same price, which means all the other participants don't have to worry about whether they're getting the best price because the market sorts itself. Now, in DeFi today, that can be done instantaneously. So I could go and buy on one exchange and sell on another exchange in the same transaction. It happens instantaneously. And the reason that's so powerful is because you basically minimize any risk, because either the transaction buys for, 1.1 on one exchange and sells for 1.2 on the other exchange, or it doesn't. The price can't move in between the buy and the sell. And if in the time it takes you to program the transaction, the price does change, then the transaction's not valid. It doesn't happen. With sharding, you basically go from an instantaneous transaction to, if those two exchanges were on different shards, some kind of delay. And for the sake of this argument, I don't even need to argue about what that delay is. Anything over instant is unacceptable in our opinion, now that instant is available. Because suddenly then you're taking on risk again. You bought. Well, and some people will go, well, you could just hold the funds until it goes through on that second shard. And you're like, cool, what are you doing for everyone else trying to trade on that exchange at the same time? Do you roll back all of their trades? Well, no, you can't do that. That doesn't make sense. So what about if instead you just say, tough luck, Mr. Person trying to do the arbitrage, you're just going to lose money. Well, now you're going to get a less efficient financial system, and you've just defeated one of the superpowers of a global asset layer. And so the analogy I use here is when you look at the internet, for anyone listening who remembers the early days or the early adoption period of the internet, many big corporations especially were like, this internet thing is really good, like this distributed network between all of our sites, but this public internet, no, I don't like that. Bad people could access our stuff. So we're going to make intranets. And our intranet will be special to us. Only we can access it. And it's only got our tools. And if we need to communicate, we'll have some complicated system to communicate between different intranets. You don't hear about intranets very often anymore, because very quickly, all of those companies realize that actually, once you create the security on the global network in a way to keep data secure, etc., the benefits of having that unified system, that global data layer, far, far exceeded the kind of really niche speciality points of an intranet of a single network connecting that. And essentially, that's the same thing that we believe at Radix with a global asset layer for DeFi, is that as soon as you start sharding it, you add that same siloed fragmentation, still to a much lesser degree than traditional financial systems, but it's still there. So if you can solve it in a way where you're able to not have any of that silos or not have any of that delay, that's obviously going to be better for the entire system. And the way Radix solves that in layman's terms is with a concept called braiding. So the different shards of the Radix's consensus algorithm, Cerberus, for a start, there's a lot of shards, which I'll explain later, but a huge number, 2 to the power of 256. So suddenly you're not thinking about, okay, well, we'll put 1 or 2 dApps on each shard. It's literally down to every asset. Every atom on Earth could have its own shard, and there'd be shards to spare. Now, any transaction where, say, I was sending money to you, Neil, and to keep things simple, my account is on one shard, your account's on another shard. To make that instant, Cerberus braids our 2 shards together. And so they're like on top of each other. If you ever remember like folding the wormhole analogy in that film, I can never remember, where they poke a pencil through a piece of paper. Yeah. Fold the paper in half, it's touching. Same example. Braid it together, and then they're on top of each other. You then get all of the benefits of it being a single shard, in that the transactions are instantaneous and everything that needs to be resolved is resolved in one transaction. The problem with that, though, is you also get all the negatives of a single shard, which is basically there is only so much throughput you can have on a single shard before it starts to get a bottleneck. And so that's why we have so many, or will have so many shards, because at that point, when you're talking about every atom potentially having its own shard if needed, when shards braid together, mathematically, it becomes basically impossible for there to be overlap. Those different shards are just always meshing and braiding in different ways, in different patterns, but we're not bottlenecking. So when mine and your shards are connected hypothetically to do a transaction, my mum and her sister suddenly aren't bottlenecked by our shard, because those 2 can braid separately, ours can braid, and we have no dependencies on each other. And then they split apart again after that transaction and carry on in parallel. And so that's really how Radix's consensus mechanism is able to achieve that unlimited scalability and also maintain the technical term for it is atomic composability. So the ability for instant composability between different dApps or assets. And then the final piece of that is just how do you then continue to scale? And the answer is you just need more compute power. So you just need more nodes. And this is the real secret sauce, which is that then scales linearly. So if one node was doing 100 transactions per second, for example, if you put a second node in, it would do 200, 500, etc. It scales linearly. And the advantage of that means that you're basically just adding more nodes to service more of the shard space in parallel.
And I just cannot thank you enough for patiently explaining the value of this complex and the complexity of this technology, especially in a language that everyone can understand, because it is something that I don't think happens enough in the industry. But just to further blow the minds of people listening, those people that are still firmly rooted in the world of Web 2, can you tell me more about why you expect DeFi to move more liquidity than any other single exchange in the transitional market within the next 10 years? Because that's what we're racing towards, right?
So I try and avoid getting sucked into like when will adoption happen? How quickly will it happen? Yeah. Because for a start, there's a whole bunch of things beyond just the user experience and developer experience and ultimately the technology. So even if I sit there and say, okay, hypothetically, Radix has solved everything from the technology perspective. The technology is now perfect. There's still regulation, there's still user knowledge, education, people building these applications, the ecosystems forming, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Sure, that could happen very quickly. It could happen not so quickly. I don't know exactly when it will happen. But I do know that it will happen because it's like opening a Pandora's box. If you think down logically, what is the purpose of the global financial market? It is to, as efficiently as possible, allocate capital based on risk and opportunity. Yeah. Now, the way that works currently is you have multiple intermediaries, you have siloed systems, and they're still ledgers. Like a bank is just a ledger. It's just not a distributed ledger. It's not quite often it's not even a technology ledger. There's plenty of banks that I know from friends in the industry run terrifying Excel spreadsheets in the background that secretly run everything. But you start looking at these things and you're like, these are just siloed systems. And so every time you're like, oh, well, I want to send Neil some money. There's steps that it's got to go through. There's different technology platforms. There's different ledgers, let alone sending money overseas or through complex exchanges or something like that. It's slow. And each of those parties, each of those intermediaries want a fee. Of course they do. They're a business. They're providing a service. So then you have higher fees, you have higher costs, and it's slow. And it might be getting faster, but it's still slow. DeFi will inevitably win because if you do create that one unified layer, where everything can work together instantly. Suddenly then, not only do you remove a lot of the intermediaries, but you also create a system where the transactions are cheaper, they're instantaneous or near instantaneous, and are able to compose with any other thing anywhere. Now, you might go, well, why would you want to do that? And as an end user, maybe you wouldn't. But that system running behind you is still important. Like how many people listening right now are actively trading on the Forex market? Okay, maybe some. How many of those are also trading in commodities? How many of those are also interacting with emerging markets, yield, gilts or bonds or something? Again, I'm probably down to maybe one or two listeners at this point. The point is, though, everyone who's got a bank account that's earning them some interest, everyone who's got a mortgage is somehow plugged in and reliant on this entire financial system operating to literally provide capital and liquidity to our business endeavors, our personal endeavors, our collective endeavors as a human species to create incredible things. And every time we've revolutionized the way, be that through moving from barter to money, from money to banking, we've seen these huge increases in what we've been able to achieve as a species. And I think DeFi is inevitable because it makes that even more efficient. And if you look at the same pattern, you can see exactly that same pattern with information. So if you go back again to barter times, before the printing press, if you go back far enough, before written form, really anyway, information was shared by meeting someone. I'd have to be next to you, Neil, and say, I've got a story for you, Neil, or I'm going to show you how to make fire. Yeah. It was very inefficient. And that's how information propagated. Then we invented writing and then obviously the printing press. And suddenly there was a more efficient way to communicate. But the printing press led to basically publishers. So you had many people could push into a publisher to go and publish this text, this information, and distribute it. And that was distributed from the publisher as one to many. So it was one to one, or one to publisher, and then one to many as the read of that. And that was really good. It was a massive innovation. And then, of course, along came the internet. And suddenly it was many to many. Any person now with the internet can go and share information with anyone, anywhere, anytime. And sure, it's not perfect. There's plenty of things well documented that don't go well with that. But on the whole, it's been a marvel in the improvement of the human species and our ability to innovate and grow. Whereas if you look at financial services, we went from bartering to money as this intermediary, but then we had banks when it became impractical of, you wanted to go and send some money to or buy something off someone in a different town. It wasn't really that practical lugging a horse and cart full of gold over there. So you had bank ledgers. And banks existed, and they existed for a long time. They got more complicated. The internet came along and showed peer-to-peer of data, and the bank said, now we're going to keep in this intermediary stage. And that's what DeFi solves. It takes it to that next level where actually anyone can interact with anything instantly.
A quick few questions for you all. Does online privacy or lack of it concern you? And do you ever feel like your online privacy has been invaded? Well, after 2,300 podcast interviews on here, there are so many areas that I'm now aware of, such as the fact that my internet service provider literally knows everything that I do online. And incognito mode in a web browser doesn't offer as much protection as many think. But think about this. Would you find the prospect of handing over your laptop or phone to a complete stranger, or even a friend for that matter, to look at your browsing history to be the stuff of nightmares? And yet, someone out there knows absolutely everything you do online, every click, whether you like it or not. So if you want to stop internet service providers from always looking over your shoulder and profiting from your data, you need something like Private Internet Access, which is the world's most transparent VPN provider. They have over 30 million downloads. PIA has servers in 84 countries and in all 50 states. And it's the perfect software for staying private online because it hides your IP address and encrypts your internet connection. And Private Internet Access is really easy to use. There are apps available for all operating systems, and one subscription can protect up to 10 devices at once. And I'll be honest, as a daily tech podcaster, keeping my life private is very important to me. And after thousands of interviews talking about security issues on here, I'm more determined than ever to keep snoopers out of my digital life. So if you want to enjoy all the benefits of Private Internet Access, now's a great time to subscribe. Simply head to piavpn.com/techtalksdaily and get an 83% discount. Seriously, 83%, which works out at just $2.03 a month. And you also get 4 months completely free. But to activate this offer, you must go to piavpn.com/techtalksdaily for a truly private digital life. One last time, piavpn.com/techtalksdaily. And you did say there a few moments ago, instantaneous and cheaper. And I know the word cheaper is going to have a lot of people rocking back and forth, saying things like gas fees. So with that in mind, dare I ask the big question if the future of DeFi still belongs to Ethereum? At the risk of triggering you, of course.
So I think it's a really good question. I mean, the future of DeFi, it could belong to anyone, is my actual answer to that. And the reason I say that is how early we are in the space is unimaginable. Like, at its peak, DeFi was about $220 billion of value within the system. That was rehypothecated, so maybe a bit less than that. But even if you take that like $250 or $220 billion mark at that point in DeFi as a whole, and then you compare it to the $400 trillion that moved through the global financial sector, not including options and derivatives, that's about 0.02%. So even if you said, DeFi, most of that activity was happening on Ethereum. Yes, it was. Cool. Ethereum has got 0.02% of the opportunity here. I don't think that's a first mover advantage of any note at that stage.
100%. And of course, we will have a lot of business leaders listening. And for those people, is any advice that you would offer on how to scale blockchain?
So probably this may sound a bit counterintuitive. Don't try and do it yourself. Building a layer one network is not hard. Is hard. Rather, it's not for the faint of heart, and it's not something everyone needs to do. Again, not everyone sits there and creates their own intranet. Not everyone, like we all use the public internet. So look for these services that are available. As we're seeing, the industry is maturing. I've been fortunate enough to have been personally involved in it from quite an early stage and professionally since like the 2017 era. Even in that time, like the early stages, like this idea of decentralized money was the thing, and it made sense. Then in the 2017 era, obviously Ethereum was coming out, this idea of decentralized programmable networks. And obviously the initial coin offering as a financial service of raising funds became hugely popular. And again, in that, there was plenty of people. The big question at that time was always, why do you have a token? Yes. Number one question I asked every project at that time was just like, why do you have a token? Like, well, we're doing logistics or so-and-so and our token, and we've got this token. You're like, why?
Yeah.
Like, because we're crypto. It's like, cool, you're just sticking on. And that era fell out, and naturally, some were still hugely successful off the back of that because they had reasons to utilize that technology. Then we saw the kind of DeFi boom, where so much of the innovation of what could be done in decentralized finance, things like automated market maker exchanges rather than order book exchanges, collateralized lending positions, flash loans, etc., which are probably terms most people aren't familiar with. But again, they are things that are just showing the proof of concept. And then that died down a bit. And now the builders are building the next phase of that. And it's going to take X number of phases. I don't know how many it will be, but it will happen quickly. And it will happen, and by quickly, I mean, it will happen suddenly. And again, the analogy I always think of this is I will distinctly remember the day when I heard on the news that the first iPhone was 10 years old.
Yeah.
And I remember sitting there, and I'm young enough to remember in my teenage years, the first iPhone coming out, and the first time I saw one in person and being like, wow, this is the future. It's amazing. And it was a big deal. I remember seeing it. And I hear 10 years and I'm like, simultaneously, that seems like no time at all. But also it must have been longer than 10 years because everybody I know has a smartphone.
Yeah.
When did that happen? When did we go? In 10 years, we went from nobody had a smartphone and it was incredible that I saw one to everybody had a smartphone. And you'd be more shocked if someone pulled out a Nokia 3310. And I think exactly the same thing happens every time in technology adoption. It feels very slow until the right pieces come together, just as they did with the iPhone, just as they did with the internet, just as they did with Tesla. The same thing will happen with crypto. And it already has a few times, but DeFi and where we're going with Web3 around assets and identity, I think is the wave that it's going to suddenly happen. And it will be when things like the user experience, the developer experience, and the underlying infrastructure are actually able to meet the needs of all of the people who want to interact with it.
Yeah, and I would say if we go back just 4 months ago, if you'd ask anyone outside of the tech industry to define what artificial intelligence is, what machine learning is, what value it can offer, most people would have struggled to say that, to tell you what they meant and what value they could bring. But of course, fast forward 3 months and ChatGPT comes along. It's got over 100 million users in just 3 months. I think it took even TikTok 9 months to reach a figure like that. And now everyone's debating, okay, what if we put it in Microsoft Office? What could we do here? What if it's search? As you said, it can happen so quickly, can't it?
And also, like ChatGPT is such a good example of the waves it comes in.
Yeah.
And so again, I am not bashing ChatGPT in any way, shape, or form, sure. But it is still, by their own ambition, it is a prototype.
Yeah.
And from their earlier version to this version, like I remember the first online chatbots when they started coming out. I remember the terrible tales of when Microsoft let one loose on Twitter for a day and had to turn it. I won't mention anything that it did, but I'm sure many people remember.
Yeah.
Again, innovation happens very, very quickly. And ChatGPT and V3 of it, as it currently stands, is incredible. It is a magnificent piece of technology, but it still has limitations. And I have no doubt that ChatGPT 4 is going to be probably orders of magnitude better. Yeah. And it will then suddenly click. And right now it feels in the same way as like in 2017 with the ICO bubble. It's like we can slap ChatGPT on it and make it better. Yeah. We can slap a token on it because we can. And it's like some of them will be legitimate cases. They will be legitimate, innovative situations to use it. Some of them will catastrophically fail because it didn't make sense or the technology wasn't right. But at some point, and it could be now, I might be wrong on this, it could be right now, the technology will be right, and then it will happen really suddenly.
And of course, increasing adoption is always a big topic in any industry. And I think conversations like this are absolutely crucial. So with that in mind, can I ask you to expand on how Radix is essentially a public ledger entirely focused on bringing DeFi into the mainstream? Because that's what we're trying to do here, especially with this conversation. And then also, I know we're still asking this question all these years later, and tell me a little bit more about the role of the XRD token too.
Yeah, so I'll start with the latter because that's a quicker question. So the XRD token is the native token of the Radix public network. So the Radix public network is being rolled out in phases. Its mainnet went live in the summer of 2021. Pleased to say it's been running flawlessly since then, with completely distributed set of nodes running it, completely permissionless. So they're all run by separate entities. The XRD token is primarily used to stake a delegated proof of stake to nodes to secure the network. So you delegate your tokens. So they stay in your wallet, but they go to the vote power within consensus of that node. And at the moment in the network, in its current state, that's the top 100 nodes by the amount of delegated stake. Their votes are used to decide what happened and what didn't happen on the network. So if a transaction did happen or didn't happen, basically. The other use of it is to pay transaction fees. So there are fees on the Radix network there, and that is a really crucial thing, because whenever you do a transaction on a public decentralized network, there is a compute cost to it. Now, that compute cost with delegated proof of stake rather than like proof of work or something like that is astronomically lower. But with smart contracts, especially more complex smart contracts, the more that are being processed, the more compute power it has. Now, we are talking tiny values here, but there is a value there. So you've got to pay some kind of transaction fee for that. And some of that transaction fee is burnt. And in our next update, some of that transaction fee also goes to the node runners. And so what that creates is basically you have XRD to be able to interact with the network and secure it. And it's also very likely, looking at what other layer one networks have done with native tokens, that the native token becomes a core piece of collateral within an ecosystem. So on decentralized exchanges and things like that. So that's the purpose of the XRD token. Now, what does it mean to get mainstream users into
mainstream audiences, businesses, etc.?
Yeah, so our view on this at Radix is it's the full stack. And this is a bit of a complicated bit to get into conceptually, but bear with me for a second. So what a lot of people, when we say we've got the full stack that solves scalability, developer experience, and user experience, people naturally box them and go, well, users are going to want the user experience and the developers are going to want the developer experience. That's not really true. Actually, it all matters to everyone, because if the platform's got a great developer experience, yeah, of course, that's good for developers. But it also means that thanks to Radix Engine and Scripto, our programming language, smart contracts built on Radix are inherently more secure. They have inbuilt guardrails on the platform level that prevent many of the hacks and exploits that we've seen in crypto and Web3 so far. It also means that the time to talent's way lower. So you've got way more builders coming to create things, which again, as a user, that's fantastic. Now I can be more confident that they're secure, and I've got more choice of what I can go and use my assets where they'll use on this platform. So the developer experience massively matters, and vice versa. The user experience massively matters to developers and builders, because what you don't want is to say, well, I've got this great app, look at things like Uniswap or Aave, for example. And you go, wow, people get the idea of Uniswap. You put two assets in there and facilitate people to swap between them, and you get a fee every time they do. Pretty simple in concept. I understand that. I might want to swap. And you go, Uniswap goes, cool, I'm going to run a marketing campaign. Step one, you need to set up an Ethereum wallet on MetaMask. Yeah, you're going to have to set this up. You're going to have to split up your seed phrase. Make sure you secure that. Otherwise, you'll lose all your money. By the way, you probably want a hardware wallet as well, because if you get hacked, you could lose all your money there. Make sure you're definitely coming to Uniswap as our app and not someone who looks like us, because then you could also lose all your money. Oh, and you don't have any Ethereum yet, so you're going to have to go to an exchange. By the way, please go and set up an exchange account. You can see why that's not particularly fun if you're the person just trying to build an application. Like, imagine if every time you wanted to use Facebook had to explain to the end user how to set up the internet. It's going to be a bit of a bottleneck. So our approach was really, all of these layers of the stack are integral to all of the end users. And for me, the bit which, for it to go mainstream, my thinking right now is it's all about confidence. Is if users and developers cannot confidently use this technology, it's not going to go mainstream. And I think that's where the problem is. Like, I myself use Web3 extensively, and I have done for many years. I know many people who have. But I only know a handful of people personally who do. And it's because it just doesn't work for them. I know I've also spoken to many, many developers who've looked at the current way you build smart contracts, both individual developers, but especially things like fintech companies who've looked at DeFi and been like, they hear about it and they're like, this is amazing. It's so new and no one's built anything yet. Look at all these things we could take from our kind of traditional finance experience and fintech experience and come and build on DeFi, and it'll be revolutionary, but it's fairly basic in the more mature TradFi system. And they come and have a look at it and they're like, that's how you build it. And that's managing $100 million of our users' funds. And you can't guarantee that it's not going to get hacked or exploited or really any confidence at all. Yeah, we're not deploying that. Yeah. Because they're not confident. On the user side, again, are your mum, your friends, your family, your colleagues realistically going to feel safe having all of their, at the end state, having all of their net worth tied up in a 28-word seed phrase that they have to secure in 3 different places, can never lose, can never let anyone else access. If they've got to have, there was one recently, and this is a great example of this, was on crypto Twitter about 10 days ago or so. Quite an experienced user put up that he'd lost all of his NFTs, or a large number of his NFTs. I believe it was about $1 million worth, because he approved a transaction that was a malicious transaction. And this was an experienced user. Yeah. And there were people coming out here being like, well, you should have used a burner wallet in between these to make sure that it was safe. Or why didn't you just go and look at the transaction details or the smart contract details and work out exactly what it's doing? And you're just like, that is not a solution to this problem. The problem was how, if even an experienced user gets that MetaMask pop-up and on his user, it pops up and it's like, do you want to sign this transaction? And it gives you a transaction hash, which is, for all intents and purposes, a random string of letters and numbers. And you can either click approve or decline. Those are your 2 options. We call it blind signing. You have no idea what you're signing. You're just trusting that the user interface you went on that generated this transaction has generated the transaction correctly, isn't malicious, hasn't been exploited, and is behaving as you had expected, and you click approve. And as an experienced user, even the first time I did that, that's terrifying. If I ever do it with large sums of money, it's still terrifying, because you are going on the basis of, well, it's worked all the other times and everyone else it's worked for, so it'll probably work this time as well. That's not confidence. That's just a slight degree of a crazy and a certain risk appetite. Probably not the risk appetite that someone's grandmother's going to be open to, let alone colleagues or anything else. So that's what I mean by going mainstream, is people have to be confident using this technology, and they have to be confident building this technology.
Yeah, and it almost has to be invisible for them, doesn't it? Because most people are not interested in how stuff works or what goes on under the hood. They want it to be, they want that Amazon seamless one-click basket kind of experience, don't they?
Exactly. And why do you need to know why it works? In the start of my career, when I worked in online video, one of the big things that we worked on was using UDP rather than TCP for peer-to-peer and also server-to-user video broadcasts. I'd be amazed if more than 1 or 2 people who listen to this podcast ever understood what I just said. Yeah. I also guarantee you that everyone who's listening to this podcast has probably watched a video online. Yeah, without needing to know what I just said. And that's exactly the same thing with crypto and DLT technology. Is you don't need to know how it works. You just need to be confident that it is going to work and that you can use it the way you want to.
Now, obviously, this is a generalist business tech podcast where we tackle a different topic every day. That's why I wanted to try and demystify this space a little today. But we will have loyal members of your community patiently listening, hoping for an update or something there. So are there any teasers you can leave us with today or anything about what your community can expect this year? So
I'm sure the people avidly listening will be aware, but I would never shy away from telling people. So We're currently, crypto and Radix Engine, our programming language, went live at the end of 2021 in early access. Since then, it's gone through public test environment, AlphaNet. It's now in its BeachNet stage. BeachNet 2 is going to be coming up shortly. It then goes to release candidate at the end of Q1. And then in Q2, we upgrade our current mainnet to incorporate all of this technology, bring in things like the Radix wallet for the revolutionary user experience. And that's really, for me, that's not the end state. That's the starting gun. That's the point when The builders who were doing amazing things, like with our current first grants program, is literally just started yesterday. So that's going well. Builders can actually connect with end users and start utilizing this network in the ways they see best. And at Radix, our overall mission is, as avid listeners will know, is to give builders everything that they need to build this Web3 future. And that's what we'll keep on delivering from our Babylon release in Q2 and long beyond that.
Well, we started the podcast today talking about your origin story. As we come full circle and reflect on your career, I'm going to ask you to leave the listeners with something else. And that is a book that has inspired you, or just something that you can recommend that we can add to our Amazon wish list for everyone to check out. If I was to ask you to leave everyone with one book, what would it be and why?
It would be a book called The Chimp Paradox by Professor Stephen Peterson. And this is a fun fact about me is I was a full-time member of the Great Britain Spring Kayaking team, competing in 4 World Championships, 3 European Championships. And his book, The Chimp Paradox, is all about managing how your brain works, especially in stress situations, and how you can manage that both proactively and reactively. And famously, Chris Hoy, a highly decorated Olympian, a British cyclist, credits it for his success. And it is the most fantastic thing to understand, especially in business. And from all my time in kayaking, the psychology work there was one of the things that was most transferable to coming into business, and especially startups and scale-up businesses. The elite performance psychology is incredible. So I recommend that book to everyone.
Awesome. Well, I'll add that straight to our Amazon wish list. And for everyone listening that wants to find out more information about Radix, maybe explore some of the topics we talked about today, even join your community. And I know they're very welcoming over there. So what's the best place to start for everything Radix?
So easiest place to go is radixdlt.com. That's DLT, all one word, .com. At the top, there's a banner about RadFi. That was a big keynote event we did at the start of December. I'd suggest you click that and just watch RadFi. It is, even if you want to watch it start to finish, it's about an hour and 20 minutes. It shows you and explains through our entire stack, and also shows off the cool stuff we've got coming with the Radix wallet with Babylon.
Well, again, cannot thank you enough for demystifying some of this technology with me today, and also explaining why DeFi, and we can expect DeFi to have more liquidity than any other single exchange in the transitional market much sooner than many people think. It's a very exciting space to be in at the moment. And I cannot thank you enough for coming on here and demystifying that technology and making it more palatable to people from any background and knowledge and whatever industry they may be listening from today. But not only that, for sharing your origin story too and leaving us with a cracking book. So just thanks for sharing that with me today.
Thank you very much for having me, Neil, and thanks everyone for listening.
So for people outside of the Web3 space, and by that I mean just people interested in technology, business leaders, brands, did you find today useful? Were we able to demystify the complex world of blockchain, crypto and sharding? For me, Adam did an amazing job there, and I just love how patient he was in asking these questions, because it's a world that he knows inside out, and taking those complexities and putting them into a language everyone can understand is a real gift. So Adam, a huge thank you for taking the time out to share that with me today. And anybody that's got any questions, or you want to add anything to the discussion, or you want to join me on this podcast, whatever it might be, please email me, techblogwriter@outlook.com, Twitter, LinkedIn, Instagram, @NeilCHughes. We'll keep this conversation going. Hopefully together we can increase awareness, increase adoption in every project. You might say I'm a dreamer, but hey, I'm not the only one, right? But I also cordially invite you to join me again tomorrow. We'll do it all again with a different guest. But thank you for listening as always, and until next time, don't be a stranger.